Sup gang, Sheetz here with a 14 Dawnbreaker. Pretty smooth run overall, only 4 deaths, one of which was a complete accident. Ignore the details here as that's from yet another bricked Grim Patrol. I don't want to talk about it. Character stats here. Let's get started. As always, be sure to join my Discord to get all my UI add-on and weak aura info, or to just ask general questions. So this is actually my second Dawnbreaker video. The other one was a 2-chested 10, but it didn't have any sound or commentary or my streamer plugin, so you can see what abilities I was casting. So all in all, it was pretty pathetic. Hoping to recover on this one, and it's a higher key level as well, so it's just more fun all around. So for those that followed my opener there, you can see I had a Tempest ready to go before the key even started. A little bit of a tweak to my enhancement guide video that I posted recently. In that, I just had you have enough maelstroms so that you could send chain lightning on your first pull to proc the Tempest. Since then, I've learned that during that 10-second window after the key starts, but that shimmering wall is still there, just use your generated maelstrom to cast healing surges on yourself. Usually 2 of them is good. The first one will proc the Tempest. The second will give you 10 maelstrom spent towards your next Tempest. You can also have a training dummy in certain dungeons before the key is put in to activate Awakening Storms, and that Tempest persists through the key starting. I don't do it here, but I'll post another video where I do. By the way, in case you didn't know, if you ever want to see my rotation, you can see what I'm casting right here, the entire dungeon. So for this dungeon, that first pack, I'm not going to touch on too much. I've never seen it brick there. There's a couple things to interrupt, but more or less just burn those guys down and move on to the second pack, which is this one, and this is where you want to lust. So the tank is going to grab those first 3 mobs, which is a commander, a curse blade, and a shadow mage, and then pull them to the left where you'll get another 2 curse blades and a ritualist. Key interrupts are the commander's Abyssal Howl, which will give nearby enemies an absorb shield and do AoE damage to players, and the shadow mage will cast Ensnaring Shadows, which applies a curse that slows movement speed and does a lot of damage. Throughout this video, I'll be speeding up a lot of the gameplay once I enter a pack, just so you're not sitting here staring at me running a dungeon from start to finish. Done it a couple times already, and honestly, it's probably pretty boring to watch, and at least this way you still get to see my rotation, and the entire dungeon just sped up a little bit. So after that pack, you'll wait a few seconds, and then everyone in the group will get Radiant Light, which will allow you to take flight. So get on your mount and either skyride or do the normal flight style over to the first of 2 side ships. You want to start with the northeast ship, which is the one we flew to. Here, if you look at the MDT map, this is the one you want to go to. On this first ship, you'll encounter 2 more curse blades, another shadow mage, and your first web mage. Make sure you're kicking the shadow mages and snaring shadows like before, and otherwise kick whatever you can just to help out. The web mage will also cast bursting cocoon, which is something you definitely want to watch out for. One player will be targeted by this, which puts a circle around them that pulsates damage to everyone inside every second for 6 seconds, then explodes for a large amount of damage. Now, I've had this on me in lower keys before, and it was no big deal, but boy did it ever hit me hard in this run and give us our first death. I was also barely over 3 mil health when it exploded, so it makes sense, but definitely something I'll be sure to have a defensive ready for moving forward. You can see a funny little moment here too, where I couldn't decide if I should release or onk. I decided to release since the respawn is the big ship, and this pack was about to die anyway. That's actually a good topic to bring up in general for Shaman, when to onk, and generally speaking, I onk whenever possible, unless it's a situation like this where a pack is about to die or you're really close to a respawn point. Here's a fun little flowchart I made in Canva to help you decide if you should onk or not. I recommend printing it and putting it on your fridge. On to the next ship, we have another commander, another web mage, and a curse blade. This pack's a little bit easier, just again watch out for that cocoon and burn them down. Other than the mobs on these ships, you also need to make sure you place a bomb after they're dead before you leave the ship. That'll blow it up and allow you to start the boss encounter once they're both blown up. Pretty simple to do. Once all the mobs are dead, a little silhouette of the bomb will show up right in the middle of the ship. Somebody just needs to right click it. That's it. So after the second ship, you're able to return to the Dawnbreaker, which is the main ship. A little note here is there's an anvil that not everyone realizes is there, but it's a great opportunity to just repair real quick, especially if you've died, before you start the boss encounter. So first boss, Speaker Shadow Crown. This is a fairly simple fight. She'll cast shadow bolts throughout that if you can kick those, that would be helpful. Then she casts Obsidian Beam, which shoots out these beams, and then she'll rotate either clockwise or counterclockwise just to make sure as they're going out, you're standing in one of the safe spots, and then go in the direction that she's turning so that you don't get hit. Immediately after, she'll cast Collapsing Night on 2 players. Now, this is where it's ideal to have 2 ranged players in your group. One can be DPS and the other can be a healer, or just 2 ranged DPS. A pool will be spawned under each that does pulsating damage every half second, so if you stand in it, even for a second and a half, you'll probably die, so make sure you move out of it really quickly. If you're running a full melee comp, just make sure everybody's stacked for the Collapsing Night and then move to one direction all at the same time. Then at 50%, she'll cast Darkness Comes. This is where she teleports to the center of the ship and starts casting a gigantic shadow dome that gets bigger and bigger. So this is where you want to hop on your mount and fly away, and just stay away until she's done casting, then fly back, and you're essentially doing a rinse and repeat of the first phase. Shaman, be mindful of your cooldown on Ascendance. Just don't pop it when she's about to hit 50%, because then you'll be in Ascendance and have to fly away, and that's just a complete waste. Just save it, and when you get down after Darkness Comes, then you can pop it and blast off. So once she's dead, she'll cast Darkness Comes one more time. You just hop on your mount and you can immediately go to the next pull. You don't have to wait around for her to finish her cast. So one of the cool things about Dawnbreaker is it's one of the only dungeons this tier that gives you options for your path. This time we're deciding to go behind the church. We're going to pull the group at the top of the stairs and bring them down to this group at the bottom. Now this pull, we're introducing 2 tacticians, a manifested shadow, and a Nightfall Darkcaster. The most important thing to keep in mind on this pull is positioning. The Nightfall tacticians will cast Black Edge, which slams the ground with a shadow empowered weapon, inflicting a bunch of damage and snaring targets by 30%, most likely a one shot if you stand in it in higher keys. Make sure you're kicking the Nightfall Darkcaster's Tormenting Beam. Otherwise, your prio target should probably be the Manifested Shadow. It has a ton of health and does some serious damage with its abilities Dark Flows, Black Hail, and Abyssal Rot. Nothing you can interrupt, just make sure you burn it down quick. After that, we're going to head into the church, and this next pack is actually exactly the same as the last one, except one less tactician. So rinse and repeat. Next up, we have the first of 3 mini bosses. I'm gonna butcher this name, but Excretin the Unbreakable, I think. You have to kill all 3 mini bosses in order to remove buffs from the second boss. If you keep any of them up, that second boss will be pretty much impossible. Shaman, you should be able to time your Ascendance to have it up for all 3 mini bosses, starting with this one, so pop it off right away, and then it should be ready for the next one and the one after that. Key mechanics to watch out for here, at least as a DPS. The mini boss will target the tank with Terrifying Slam, which puts a huge circle around them. Depending on where they're tanking it, in this case it's in the corner, the tank is just going to stand still and the rest of us run away. Sometimes the tank will run away and the rest of you stand still. Just make sure you're coordinating with the group or know what the plan is, but don't stand in that. And then one player will be targeted with Abyssal Blast. Probably good to use a defensive here, as it does a bunch of initial damage and then more damage over time every second for 9 seconds. Another Shaman tip: as you run out from Terrifying Slam, you can use Feral Lunge to get back in every other cast. Once the mini boss is dead, you move on to the outside, where you have 2 more Manifested Shadows and 2 more Nightfall Shadowstalkers. Pretty much a rinse and repeat of what you've dealt with already. So I'm just going to let this play out in 2 times speed. Next up is the next mini boss, and this is easily a wipeable area. So this is where we use Bloodlust. We have 2 tacticians, 2 Shadowstalkers, and the mini boss. Again, I'm going to butcher the name, but Ascendant Visoxria. Great place to use Ascendance and Ancestral Guidance here. Again, watch out for the tactician's frontal, otherwise the mini boss casts Shadowy Decay, which will do pulsating damage every second for 3 seconds. This damage is pretty big, so not a bad idea to pop a defensive for that. Biggest thing here is just stay alive. It's hard enough for the healer to keep the tank up, so use your defensives freely and do a ton of damage. Next up, we fly over to this area with the third mini boss. Pretty similar all around, but the big thing with this mini boss is they'll cast Dark Orb on a random player. You have to make sure this is aimed down the path. If it hits the wall, it'll wipe the group. You'll know you'll have it if you have a huge beam pointed at you from the mini boss, so just keep an eye out for that and aim it accordingly. Okay, so this next pull requires a lot of CC, so if you're not in a voice group like we aren't, just keep an eye on what everyone's doing for interrupts. I start with a cap totem just to get things started, and then I keep an eye on what everyone else is doing. When I see some casts are about to get off, I throw a Sundering, and then I still have Thunderstorm that I use right after. So as Shaman, we have 3 great AoE interrupt stops. Just make sure you're using those at the right moments. And we actually handled this pretty well. I've been in other groups where we hadn't done really good here and then we wiped, so definitely be on your toes. So now we head over to the second boss. A couple things to watch out for here. One is the Dark Orb is back from this most recent mini boss. Same exact idea, just aim it down the path, don't let it hit a wall, otherwise you'll wipe. And the boss will cast Shadowy Decay, which is an AoE. Good spot to use a defensive. If you have a DK, they might use AMZ. Or if you have a priest, they can use their bubble shield thingy, I forget what it's called. But regardless, it's a good spot to use a defensive. Shaman, you can use Ancestral Guidance to help out as well. The tank will get Terrifying Slam from the first mini boss. The big purple circle, they'll typically move it out in this case, and it knocks them back as well, so just make sure you're not in it. If you have to move, go ahead and move. And the boss will spawn a bunch of adds periodically. Good spot to use Ascendant if you wanted to save it, but it's not necessary. Great spot to use Primordial Wave and Tempest, so get in some nice pad and then kill the boss. After boss, you remount and fly back to the Dawnbreaker. Some adds are up here. We have a lieutenant type boss, almost a mini boss. We have to kill her. She spawns adds throughout the fight that are gonna have casts you want to interrupt. She's also gonna spawn little AoE circles around random players. Just make sure you're away from the rest of the group during that. Pop a defensive because it does do a lot of damage. Your prio is this little mini boss thing, lieutenant, whatever it is. As soon as it dies, it'll spawn the last boss, rush on and on and on and on and on. And until you kill her, she'll keep spawning other adds. So definitely prio is her, but get off your interrupts as well. So last boss, Roshanon, has 2 phases. First phase is on the Dawnbreaker. Second phase, she'll fly away and land nearby. You'll see where. That's where you actually kind of kill her. You actually only get her to about 60%, and she flies away again to be killed in the raid. But that ends the dungeon, so it's all good. This upper section, the first phase, your damage doesn't really matter because there's going to be these 6 bombs that spawn, 3 at a time. As a group, you want to keep an eye on those. Go grab the bombs, walk them over to Roshanon, send them, And as soon as all 6 are sent, that's what triggers phase 2. Now, depending on how much health she has when phase 1 ends, that will determine how much health she needs to get to in phase 2 to finish the dungeon. It's kind of a weird calculation, so I always assume just get her to 60% or sometimes 59.5%, and that's close enough. So if you wanted to stare at her percent in phase 2 and the timer and stress yourself out, then that's totally an option. So things to watch out for besides the bomb is expel webs. That'll shoot out a series of webs in lines. Just make sure you're not standing in those. If you get hit by them, then it's not good. The other thing to watch out for is rolling acid. One player will get targeted by this and it'll spawn a giant green line that kind of fades to one direction. You need to make sure that that direction is pointed away from the group. So if it's fading left, you need to walk to the left so the rest of the group is on the right. If it's fading right, walk right so the rest of the group is on the left. You don't want people to get hit by that because once it goes off, then it'll spawn a big wave that goes that direction that it's fading toward. It'll stun you as the player briefly, but if it hits everyone else, it'll do a bunch of damage. So once phase 2 starts, you get on your mount and fly off the ship. Now, early season, everyone followed Rashanan around, but really you can just fly straight to where you're going to end up doing the phase 2 fight. Be careful though, if you are in the darkness for too long, it'll just kill you, and that's what happened to the mage here. That's that kind of accidental death I was talking about at the beginning. Pretty funny actually. It's rare that you see that, but it's happened to me before too. Just a kind of a fluke. If you really need to, you can fly through one of the light orbs and that'll kind of re-up your defensive against the darkness so you won't die. But really you should be able to just fly straight to this area. Once there, eventually Rashanan will fly around and land. You need to interrupt the first cast and then the phase 2 encounter begins. Pretty simple, basically the same mechanics as phase 1, except now you have an added mechanic where 2 players will get spinnerets strands. It puts big AoE circles around you that you need to run out of the group for, and it'll drop a pool of webs. These do a lot of damage, so I usually pop a defensive as a shaman because I'm squishy. Great spot to use feral lunge. The priest grips me in on one of these, which is a literal lifesaver, but otherwise it's a pretty straightforward encounter. And that about wraps it up. Be sure to check out my Enhancement Shaman Stormbringer guide for Mythic Plus, and thanks for watching. See you in the next video.